Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is Craig Crash Collins. I'm joined as always by Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. Today we discuss how Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce dating can turn around conference realignment. No, just kidding. We're not going to do that today. We're going to talk about a lot of things to do with college football, though. We're going to get into what we think after the first month of the season. We've learned a lot of things about all the teams. We've got Notre Dame coming off of their loss to Ohio State. How do we feel about them? We've got Purdue and IU heading into conference play. How do we think they will fare? And we're also going to talk a little college football on the national scale as well. You know, talking about our top four from the beginning of the season. So a lot to get into, B. Scott. A lot of college football to get into tonight. Because the first month of the season, as hard as it is to believe, is over, and we're getting into conference play now.
Yeah, I mean, time to get into the thick of it. Now the pretenders are going to go to the wayside and the contenders are going to come to the forefront. It's time.
Yeah, it is time to get things underway and get into kind of the meat and potatoes of the season. Let's go ahead and talk about about what we've seen so far this season. First and foremost, Notre Dame is number 11. The Fighting Irish are 4-1. They beat Navy, Tennessee State, NC State, and Central Michigan by a combined 184-47 in the first 4 weeks of the season. They led number 4 Ohio State, number 6 at the time when they were playing, 14-10 late. But the Buckeyes get down to the 1-yard line with 7 seconds left. Chip Trainum. I'm sorry, Ohio State fans blast me in the comments. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it or not, but he scores from 1 yard out he scores from a yard out with 1 second left on the clock. Of course, the big story is the fact that the Irish only had 10 men on the field for those final 2 plays. I guess
3 plays. Turns out 3 plays.
3 plays.
Final
okay.
3 plays.
Yeah. So I mean, hey, look, everyone's short-staffed these days. You
gotta do what you gotta do.
Sometimes you just gotta make what you can out of what you have.
And I don't even know though if like having every guy on the field that you're supposed to have would have really mattered.
The last play, yes, because literally where they were missing a person was right where the Ohio State guy ran.
I know,
so,
but I still, yeah, potentially, but that Ohio State running back is a converted linebacker and has just been plowing over people this year. So,
yeah,
well, it would have been interesting.
That game on Saturday night was very Bush push-esque. Like, not necessarily because of like how the game ended, but just because of how it felt like. You know, we all know how we think about Ohio State going into the year. We all know that, you know, they're going to be a contender. And, you know, you wonder if Notre Dame's on that level, and it looked like they were primed and ready to have one of those big wins, and then it just kind of slipped away from them late. So kind of a sad state of affairs there.
It felt like an old school college football game. Just beat, bang on each other, run it. Yeah, it really felt like an old school watching Big Ten versus Notre Dame back in the day. It was kind of, I mean, for the people that love high octane, exciting games, this game was not for you. But I'll be honest, I really, really enjoyed that game. I mean, that was a game that they kept saying throughout the commentators throughout the game kept saying, this is going to come down to the final 4 minutes. It not only came down to the final 4 minutes, it came down to the final 7 seconds. And that, I mean, that is the type of stuff you want to see out of a top 10 matchup. And I loved it, every minute of it.
Yeah, it was a fun game to watch for sure. Speaking of Ohio State, that is who beat the Indiana Hoosiers in week 1. The Hoosiers are 2-2. Although they did hang in better than expected in that game. They lost by 20, but I mean, when you consider that in most years they lose to Ohio State by 40, it's like, okay, they hung in there, they played well. They beat Indiana State decisively. They did lose to Louisville, but they needed 4 overtimes this past Saturday to beat the 1-3 Akron Zips. So that doesn't bode super well for the future, but
like the momentum you gained from that close game with Louisville just went completely out the window.
Yeah, because Louisville's ranked now. So, I mean, if you think about it, you hung in against Ohio State. I mean, because it was like 10 to 3. It was like 10 to 3 at halftime or whatever it was. It was.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe IU was I believe they were a 36-point underdog.
Yeah.
At least at one point leading up to that game against Ohio State. So the fact they only lost by 20, that's right. Really good. I mean, that IU defense, it's a good defense. It's a really good defense. I mean, IU was trying to figure out the quarterback situation for themselves at that time. And I believe if they stuck with Taven Jackson from the beginning there, I don't think they would have had a shot. But, it maybe the offense may have looked a little bit more respectable. Now, granted, I will also say that the Ohio State offense was trying to figure out their quarterback situation as well. And if we know anything about Ohio State, is that they tend to start the year sluggish. Every year, it doesn't matter who's the coach or the quarterback. It just seems like they come out of the gates a little bit slow. I mean, we've seen this before. The IU and Ohio State have opened the season against each other before, and it was a close game. But Ohio State's one of those teams that seems to pick up steam as the season progresses. So, but hey, it's all about who you get on your schedule and when.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, if we would have done this show a week ago where we, kind of dissect things, we might have had more good things to say about IU because of the fact we could be like, hey, you know what? They beat they drubbed Indiana State like they were supposed to. They hung in against Ohio State and Louisville. Louisville's now ranked. Like, hey, maybe they've got some. Maybe this thing can actually get turned around. But when you take 4 overtimes to beat Akron, and I know those games happen. I know there's some weird outcomes that happen, and it doesn't really indicate who you are. I mean, Kentucky, Ball State was hanging there with Kentucky. They hung in for a quarter against Georgia, and then they absolutely get boat raced by Georgia State. So I mean,
Georgia Southern,
yeah. So
hey,
I mean,
Georgia Southern hung in with Wisconsin as well. So
true.
That was a good team.
So yeah. IU. After this weekend, I don't know that I have as much faith in them, but I think they've had an okay season so far.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more here in a moment.
Right. The Purdue Boilermakers, they are 1-3. The Boilers lost to Fresno State, Syracuse, and dropped their Big Ten opener this past weekend. All those games coming at home, which is a little odd. Their lone victory.
The Wisconsin one's not odd. We haven't beaten Wisconsin at home since 1997.
Right. Just in general, though, the 3 home losses is not what you want to see. Their lone victory did come on the road in week 2 against Virginia Tech. So, in a game that was delayed by 6 hours.
Outside of Wisconsin, Fresno State, I believe, are they ranked now? Syracuse is ranked.
See, I don't know. Syracuse is not ranked.
They're not ranked at this
Fresno
point.
State, I can't remember if they're only ranked in one of the polls. They're ranked in either the AP or they're ranked in the coaches poll. I can't remember which one, but
okay.
Yeah,
well, we're going to really find out about Syracuse this weekend when they play Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, yeah, those teams are good. They were good.
So that's what we've seen through a month of college football. So I thought it would be fun to do a hot or cold segment. If you're just tuning into the show for the first time, basically we give some takes and we say whether or not those takes are hot takes or cold takes. We've got one for all 3 teams here from the state of Indiana, Power 5 teams from the state of Indiana. So first hot or cold question. The take is this: Notre Dame's loss to Ohio State eliminated them from college football playoff conversations. And for me, I think this is a hot take. First things first, I had to look at this from a historical standpoint. Notre Dame has made the college football playoff twice. 2018, they went in undefeated. 2020, their only loss was to Clemson in the ACC championship game. So no regular season losses in their 2 appearances in the college football playoff. 2021 was the only season in the playoff era where Notre Dame had less than 2 losses and was left out of the college football playoff. That was when they went 11-1. They lost to Cincinnati at the beginning of the year. They ended up going to the Fiesta Bowl and playing Oklahoma State. And Notre Dame played well on Saturday. In spite of the gaffe for the personnel at the end, I still think they had a shot. I still think they are a really good team. They do. I mean, I would not be surprised if they were to win out, and I think if they win out, they might be in the college football playoff conversation, if not pretty decisively in, considering what we've seen from some of the other teams at the top. But that's just it. I don't know that they do run the table, through the rest of the year. I mean, they still host number 8 USC. Game day will be at Duke this weekend for the Irish's clash with the Blue Devils. Durham will be rocking. That'll be a tough environment. We also already saw, Duke lay the wood to Clemson on the first weekend of the season. And we know, I mean, I don't know that Clemson's necessarily as good as we once thought they were, but
they hung with Florida. They should have won that Florida State game.
Right. So, we'll see what that game means. And I'm also not ruling out Clemson, who does get Notre Dame at home. The Tigers, I think they might have a chip on their shoulder considering the roles were reversed last season, where Clemson was thinking about getting back in the college football playoff conversation before going on the road to Notre Dame and getting boat raced in that game as well. So,
but really, Clemson's already got 2 losses.
No, what I'm saying is that Notre Dame will go into Clemson. Clemson will play spoiler, Notre Dame played spoiler last year when Clemson was still in the conversation. So I think for Notre Dame to have gotten into the college football playoff, I think they would have had to have beat Ohio State and then lose one of their other games on the rest of the schedule, whether that be to Clemson or whether that be to USC. I think beating Ohio State would have been part of the conversation. They would have needed that as kind of a springboard to get. I mean, I know they were already 9th, but that would have definitely shot them up to maybe in the top 5 had they beat Ohio State.
Ohio State up to the top 4.
Right. So, I think that would have had to have been part of the equation for them to still be in the college football playoff conversation, so then they could kind of weather a loss. But obviously, one more loss, then you're pretty much done. So, I think it is a hot take. They're out of the college football playoff conversation.
I'm actually going to go. This is a cold take. It's 1 loss. You look at the remaining schedule. They have some key opportunities to pick up some high quality victories. And when you look at this Notre Dame team, it is a fairly complete team. I mean, that is outside of maybe Michigan. That is probably one of the deepest running back units that any team has in the country. I mean, they just kept coming at Ohio State over and over and over again in that run game, and it just wore down that Buckeye defensive line. And you look at USC has struggled to stop the run. Well, looks like Notre Dame has figured out how to run the ball efficiently. And not only that, but they have the quarterback in place, which is a huge part of the battle of being a contender, is having a solid quarterback. And Sam Hartman is a solid quarterback. They have that opportunity, I think, to kind of run the table on the rest of their schedule. If they do that, there has got to be some pieces that fall into place ahead of them. I mean, look, I think I could almost confidently say Georgia, Michigan, and Texas are almost all but locks. I'll say Michigan and Texas. Georgia's still kind of up there for me because they have some struggles, but Georgia doesn't really, their schedule, I don't know. I think they can handle it. The 4th position though, for the college football playoff, I think is kind of up for grabs. I mean, Florida State's going to be hanging around there undefeated. Ohio State, there's a potential Ohio State could still lose 2 games. They go to Penn State, then they go to Michigan. Well, if that happens and, Notre Dame is running the table, I think there's a strong possibility Notre Dame could find their way back into the conversation. Do I necessarily think they will make the college football playoff? I don't know, because there's so many outcomes that need to happen. But it is possible. I think it is possible to find their way back into the conversation. I don't think they're completely out of it right now. Okay,
so do you think Notre Dame runs the table? Do you think right now, as it is, do you think they run the table? Because that's essentially what. Okay. Let's say, because that's essentially what this question is. Do you think they're going to run the table? Because yes, technically they're still in the conversation because they only have 1 loss, but it's whether or not you think they're going to run the table, because I think if they do run the table, it means they beat USC. I don't think USC goes the entire Pac-12 with the way the Pac-12 is played. We know they're going to cannibalize themselves like they always do. As much as I would love to see the Pac-12 have this outstanding final hurrah, I just think I'm to the point where I'm done picking them because every time I'm like, hey, maybe the Pac-12 is back, like then they all lose to each other. So I don't think USC or any of the Pac-12 teams run the table in that conference. So if Notre Dame beats USC, they're essentially out of it. I'm not so much sold on two SEC teams. We might still see two SEC teams. Right. It's gonna be a lot. There's maybe we see. I mean, I know we've seen a lot of two teams coming from one conference lately, but I think this year I might be a little different because of the Florida State situation, the fact that if Notre Dame runs the table, who comes out? Could the Pac-12 get in there? So there are a lot of different things at play here. So I think Notre Dame will be a pretty good shot if they do run the table. But that's kind of where I think we disagree. I don't think they're going to run the table, and you do think they're going to run the table.
I do. I think they have the right system. I mean, as long as they can count how many players they have on the field. Which is so surprising coming from such a good defensive coach.
Right.
Back-to-back plays, having only 10 men on the field.
Because like his explanation after the game was like, well, we couldn't make a substitution. It's like, well, but if you didn't have him in on the play prior, you couldn't have run him in there. And so I don't know. I'm not a football expert. I don't.
You weren't substituting. You were filling in. It's not like you had to wait for somebody to run off the field. You didn't have enough players on the field. But I have faith in them because that team is, that defense is stingy. I have faith in the Irish that they can run the table.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they can do because they you always kind of wonder what Notre Dame's going to actually be. It's that first big game of the season that you kind of know, like, oh, hey, this Notre Dame team is for real, or, oh, okay, this is going to be the Notre Dame team that can beat, the teams they should beat on their schedule but can't win those big games. Even though they lost to Ohio State, I think they proved that they can hang with the big boys. So we'll see. I think they do have a shot to run the table. I think I just don't have as much faith as you do.
And then looking at that Notre Dame game against Ohio State, can we just tell people to stop saying stupid things that give their opponents bulletin board material? I mean, whether it's Lou Holtz calling the entire Ohio State program soft, or it's Deion Sanders saying something about the team that they're playing that week, it's just like, can we just stop? It doesn't end well for these teams.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, it's very, you definitely don't want to give your team extra ammunition, that's for sure.
No.
So let's talk a little bit about Purdue. Of course, we talked about their 1-3. And both them and IU have a new signal caller under center. So the next take is this one: Hudson Card will have a better career at Purdue than Taven Jackson will at IU. I want to start off by saying I am pleasantly surprised with what I've seen from Taven Jackson so far this season. He's fifth in the Big Ten in QB rating. He's got a 63% completion percentage. In both of those categories, he's right there with Card and Talia Tungavailoa, who I think both of those guys going into the year we thought were probably a couple of steps ahead of Taven Jackson, who prior to this season had only had 4 reps or 4 passes, at quarterback. So the fact that he's hanging in with some of the, names that we're more familiar with, I think is a big step forward. And I think he's exceeded my expectations because, I know I'm going to make people mad at me here, but I mean, at Center Grove, his numbers weren't really eye popping because they didn't really have to be. And so so his stats didn't really jump off the page. Yes, he got recruited by Tennessee, but you wonder, you see some of these programs who just kind of recruit everyone they can and then just let everything else sort themselves out. They don't care if they, have recruited 7 quarterbacks for a class. They're like, well, one of them's going to stick around. So,
Or we can convert the rest of them to tight end or wide receiver.
right. So you're like, okay, what does that really mean? So far so good. I think he's proven himself that he should be QB1. I know that was our hot or cold take for them going into the year. Like, should he be QB1? And he is QB, and he's more than proven himself to be the better option. However, I think I'm still going with Hudson Card. This is a hot take. Card is one of only 3 Big Ten quarterbacks thus far with over 1,000 yards passing. Purdue is 4th in the Big Ten in passing offense. Plus, we've got a bigger sample size from Purdue's signal caller. He's got 66% completion, 1,518 yards, 11 touchdowns, 2 picks in his last 2 years at Texas. Like I said, Jackson only had 4 passing attempts coming into this season. Also, over the last 2 seasons, Purdue has finished 2nd in passing offense. IU finished 10th in 2021, 8th in 2022. And you might say that, Purdue finishing at the top of the Big Ten, that was a different regime. Obviously, Jeff Brom's going to throw it all over the yard, but I think there's been more evidence this year that's still they are still going to be at the top, and they still have that kind of passing mindset that we've seen.
Well, they're running an air raid. They're running an air raid offense,
right? Because of Graham Harrell. So yeah, I don't think that's going to really change a whole lot from what we've seen in the past. Because like I said, you might have thought, oh well, that's a different regime. How can you say all this stuff about their offense when it was a different regime? I think they're going to keep that going with Card. So I think that they're going to be that Card's going to have just a better career. Just because of those facts alone. And right now, I mean, like I said, Purdue's 4th currently in passing offense. IU is 9th. So with all the step forward that I think Taven Jackson has made, I still think Card has the better system around him to do those great things. And plus, I was trying to think too. I was like, how does UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington all coming into the conference? How does that affect? But I mean, the Pac-12 has okay defenses, but that's also not a conference that's known for their defense. So I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily going to be any more or less difficult than what they're already facing with the Ohio States, Michigans of the world.
Yeah. Most people be like, how can you compare the two? One is a redshirt freshman and one is much older. Well, believe it or not, Hudson Card actually has 3 years of eligibility.
Yeah, I'll out myself right now. For some reason, I had convinced myself that he was just a rental for this season. And so when you were like, hey, he's actually got 3 years of eligibility, I was like, oh, okay. For some reason, I don't know why I convinced myself of that.
Well, I mean, it just feels like he's been around for a while because, I mean, his debut last year with Texas against Alabama just feels like forever ago.
That's also true.
And he looks really old as well. But you know what? I'm going to go with Hudson Card as well, just because like you said, I have confidence as well in the system that's around him. I don't know how much longer this system at IU will be in place, to be honest. Or until the fan base or the athletic department, I should say, gets a little done with Tom Allen. But I'm not 100% confident in Hudson Card either. I was at the Wisconsin-Purdue game on Friday night, and there were several times early in the game where Hudson Card would just focus in on his first target and try to force it in there. Luckily, he's got the arm talent to be able to do that. But both times, if he would have just looked through progressions at all, he would have seen on back-to-back plays, he had a wide open TJ Sheffield for an easy walk-in touchdown. Granted, I will say this Hudson Card only had, I believe it was 2.69 seconds of clean pocket time before he could get the ball out, before he would have gotten sacked. That is the second worst time he's had this year. Fresno State, it was 2.63 seconds. So in that short amount of time, you really don't have a ton of time to go through your progressions, but it would be nice if he could just not lock in on one guy, and just a brief scan at least would have seen TJ Sheffield sitting wide open there. And you know what? I guess that's being picky. This is a guy that's brand new to this system. I mean, technically this was what, his fourth career start. Yes, fourth career start. Or no, fifth career start.
I think he had a few more starts at Texas when you were.
Well, I know he started against West Virginia. Alabama, he came in
as a backup
after Quinn Ewers went down. But he's only
had a handful of starts in general, no matter what the number is.
He's only had a handful of starts, and this is a brand new system to him. All new wide receivers. You can see the talent is there. You can see the flashes. It's just everybody's got to gel together. So I do believe he's going to have a better career overall than Taven Jackson. Not to say I don't like what Taven Jackson is proving to be a really good quarterback for IU. And if they can just figure everything else out around him, he has a potential to have a really solid career as well. But I just have more faith in the system around Hudson Card to help him succeed at a higher level.
Yeah, and I also think part of it too is going to be, you mentioned, how long the current system will be there at IU. You also wonder, Purdue right now, their defense, I know defense doesn't have anything to do with Hudson Card, but their defense is one of the worst, if not the worst, in the Big Ten right now. Purdue's is. You know they're going to get better on defense because that is their coach's specialty.
And his defense is a tough one to learn.
Right.
It is a weird version of man defense that you are switching looks up as the snap is happening. So it's to confuse the offense, but at the same time, it confuses a lot of the defenders as well. And look, on this defense, there are just a handful of players that actually were at Purdue last year. So chemistry of understanding of where everybody is they're still working on that. I for the Purdue defense, you just have to hope there's some sort of resemblance of improvement throughout the season.
Right. And where I'm going with that is that because their defense is set to improve, obviously that will mean that Purdue on the whole will be a better team. As time goes along and as Card gets more familiar with the offense. So I think Ryan Walters and company will get better. And that's also why I think, I don't really know. I mean, with IU, could they, get better? Maybe, but I mean, they just kind of, I think at this point we know what that team's going to be with
the track record of Tom Allen. Yeah, right. The track record of Tom Allen doesn't scream. There's going to be a ton of improvement as the season goes on. As a matter of fact, the history with Tom Allen shows the team will actually regress as the season progresses, unfortunately.
Well, and that kind of leads us into our final take, which is the Indiana Hoosiers finished the season with more Big Ten wins than Purdue. When you look at Purdue's remaining schedule, they have Illinois at home. They go to Iowa. They host the fourth-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes, and they go to Lincoln to play Nebraska. They are then at Michigan, number 2 Michigan, and then they are at home against Minnesota, at Northwestern, and then they are at home against IU for the bucket game. IU's remaining schedule, they go to Maryland, to number 2 Michigan. They go, they are at home against Rutgers. They're at number 6 Penn State. They get Wisconsin at home. They're at Illinois. They're at home against Michigan State. And then, of course, at Purdue for the bucket game. So I kind of, went into some of the efficiency stats to kind of determine this. I ultimately landed on this as a cold take. I still think Purdue does a little bit better. Purdue ranks 5th in the Big Ten in offensive efficiency, last in defensive efficiency. They face 4 teams, Minnesota, IU, Illinois, and Northwestern, who are in the bottom half of the league in both offensive and defensive efficiency. So teams that they're kind of are on the same kind of path where Purdue doesn't have to really worry about the defense they're playing. Their offense should be able to thrive, and their offense they're playing shouldn't be too unmanageable for their defense to kind of control and still get off the field. 3 of those do come at home, which admittedly we talked about. They've lost all their home games, but that won't be they won't go over at home this season.
No.
So So those, of course, being Illinois, IU, and Minnesota. So I do think they beat those teams that they're better with, better against, as far as like the efficiency goes. They lose to Iowa, they lose to Ohio State, they lose to Nebraska, they lose to Michigan. So I know Nebraska's kind of up in the air. I don't know what to make of Nebraska because I do think they're improved. But they lost to Minnesota, and my faith in Minnesota kind of dwindled when they lost to Northwestern. So it's kind of a transitive property where I was like, well, we went into the year knowing that Minnesota is always a pesky team. They beat Nebraska, but Nebraska looks improved. But then the team that they lost to, Minnesota, lost to Northwestern, who we all believe not only lost to Northwestern, blew a 21-point lead to Northwestern. So. Or allowed 21 points in the fourth quarter to lose to Northwestern. So, that may be a little fluky. Minnesota still could be that pesky team we always know them to be, but that just makes me kind of wonder who is Nebraska, who is Minnesota. I think we still know who Northwestern is. But yeah, it kind of makes me wonder a little bit. But that's where I'm landing on it. I think they beat Minnesota, they beat IU, they beat Northwestern. So I think ultimately they end the conference slate. They beat all those four teams, I think. Yeah, they beat Minnesota, IU, Illinois, Northwestern. So I do think they finished the conference slate at 4-5, and that's ultimately where they land. That means they don't go to a bowl game. That means they're 5-7 at the end of the year. But I think that's where they end up based on what we've seen so far.
And that's honestly where a lot of Purdue fans would have placed them coming into this season, anyways, at about 5-7, 6-6. I agree. This is a hot take. I do think Purdue does ultimately win more conference games than IU. And that has a lot to do with the division. The Big Ten, IU fans will complain and cry all day about having to play in the Big Ten East. Well, guess what? It's the last year of it. You don't have to worry about it after this year, but you still have to handle it this year. The Big Ten West, outside of Iowa and Wisconsin, is bad. Like historically bad. So yes, I think with the offensive efficiency that Purdue has and some of the lackluster offenses that they're getting ready to face, Purdue does have an opportunity to stack together, in my opinion, at least 4 Big Ten wins, if not 5. Like I was telling you before we started recording, there is a visible path for Purdue to still get to 6-6 and make it to a bowl game, which wouldn't be a bad thing. Having extra practice for these young guys would be a good thing, but it all depends on Nebraska. I'm right there with you. I think Purdue comes out on top of Illinois, Minnesota, Northwestern, and IU. The Nebraska one is just a toss-up for me, but go ahead and chalk up Ohio State, Michigan, and Iowa as L's. And look, IU's, you look at IU's conference schedule remaining. Maryland, that's not going to be easy. Rutgers, they should win that one. You still got Michigan, you still got Penn State, you still got Wisconsin. It's not an easy schedule nonetheless, regardless. Even their crossover games are some of the better teams in the Big Ten West.
Yeah.
I would say even including Purdue, because Purdue right now has the opportunity to finish 3rd, I believe, in the Big Ten West, which would be bowl, obviously that would get them bowl eligible then. But it's going to be a daunting task ahead of IU, especially coming off of the 4 overtime win against Akron. I could see that potentially seeing that Akron win, because it was not a great win, causing potential wheels to start falling off on this IU team. And I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I'm saying it could happen. Historically, when you look at IU in the past, they have one not great performance, and the wheels have started to come off at each season. Look, last year the wheels came completely off. What's to say it doesn't happen again? I don't know. I don't want it to happen again, because a good IU is good for the Purdue IU rivalry. but I do believe Purdue comes out with more Big Ten wins just solely based on schedule. And like I said earlier, it's about who you're facing each week and when you get them and everything. Which is why I'm really hesitant to give Purdue a W against Nebraska, because I could see Nebraska by then kind of figuring things out and being more improved by then.
And it's in Lincoln too, which
it is in Lincoln, but Purdue has not had struggles in Lincoln.
Well, that was with Nebraska teams that were markedly worse, though.
But even dating back to like when Bo Pelini brought them to the Big Ten, Purdue has always struggled against Nebraska in Ross-Ade. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but 4 to 5 Big Ten wins is not out of the question for Purdue. I know some Purdue fans are like, we're never going to win again. It's like, but those are the sky is falling fans. And it's like, look, if you look at the stats, I mean, Purdue didn't give up 200 yards rushing to IU. Purdue actually outrushed IU by a yard. The offense, despite it like stalling out in short yardage situations, is putting up pretty impressive numbers. They're still averaging 24 points a game. I mean, that offense is better than Iowa's offense. So you just have that there are bright spots, and that does kind of show you that they have the potential to pull out some of these games against opponents that they really probably should beat.
Yeah, for me, I think ultimately it's going to come down to the bucket game in November, which will be fun as far as like who ends up with more Big Ten wins. Because I did the efficiency thing for IU as well. They're ranked next to last in offensive efficiency, 10th in defensive efficiency, and they play 3 teams: Illinois, Purdue, Michigan State, who are ranked 10th or worse in overall efficiency. So IU's near the bottom in both. I was like, okay, who's kind of bad all the way around so far this season? That's Michigan State, Illinois, and Purdue, who are ranked 10th or worse in overall efficiency. I've given the Purdue the win to IU in the bucket game as it stands right now, so I'll give IU the win at home against Rutgers. So they beat Illinois, Rutgers, and Michigan State, who, I mean, they've had Michigan State's number the last few seasons. So even if
everybody's having Michigan State's number this year,
but I'm saying even without all the drama,
I'm giving IU that win as well, just because Michigan State is a dumpster fire right now.
Right. They're going to lose to Maryland, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Purdue, so they finished at 3-6. So I think, but like I said, that bucket game, if IU wins that one, that flips that to, if everything plays out the way I've discussed, except for the bucket game, then that plays out. You talked about, I mean, I know it's not them both being good, but that makes the bucket game exciting because it'll be who ends up with more Big Ten wins.
More bragging rights.
For sure. Alrighty, so before we wrap things up, I did want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the national scale, and I wanted to go back and kind of revisit our college football playoff picks. Our preseason picks, B. Scott, your 4 was Georgia, Michigan, Texas, and Ohio State. Mine was Bama, Georgia, Michigan, and Texas. And so kind of I wanted to not only discuss what kind of changes we want to make, but who would be our 5th and 6th teams, because when they put out their rankings, they show you the top 4, the 4 bracket, and then they list their first 2 out. And so I think you brought it up a little bit when we talked about it in the preseason. I think the one move I might make is, as shocking as it is, and I'm sure I'll eat my words later. But I think I might be out on Bama. Far as being, now I know they lost. But obviously they can still, just kind of like with Notre Dame, they're still very much in it. They can still make the college football playoff, but they do have, a tough road ahead of them. I don't, even if they went out and make it to the SEC championship game, I don't think they beat Georgia, which would give them 2 losses and effectively get rid of them as far as the college football playoff conversation. They also play games against Tennessee and LSU coming down the pike. Those games are both at home, but they're still not going to be easy games for them to win.
Texas was at home.
Right, exactly. So I just don't think that they run the table. I mean, they might run the table in the regular season, but just overall, I don't think, even if they made it to the SEC championship, they end up winning that one. So I do think I'm out on Bama. So as far as who I would have replacing them, I have to ask myself, do I think the Pac-12 does Pac-12 things and cannibalize itself? And I also have to ask myself, how confident am I in Florida State? Because Florida State also, admittedly, is a team that has, because they've had contending seasons since Jameis, and yet they've always found a way to kind of, lose their way out of the conversation. I think while I would love to see the Pac-12 make the college football playoff in their final year, I think I want to lean Florida State here. I think I'm going to put Florida State in. I don't know where I would put them in the ranking. I don't know where I would seed them, but I think Florida State is going to replace Bama as who I'm going to have in the top 4. Their win over LSU, I think, outwins any of the Pac-12 wins so far this year. I don't know. Oregon's biggest win right now is Colorado, I think. Trying to think about that off the top of my head. Washington's best win is Boise. USC, I don't really know if they have. They have. Obviously they're undefeated, but I don't know if they have a best win. Their best win would probably also be Colorado this weekend, if they can get that win. So I don't know that there's any Pac-12 win right now that outweighs what LSU was, or what Florida State was able to do to LSU. So I think that's why I have them in. Also, I'm going to keep it a buck with you. Actually, you know what? I'm going to get to that in a second, who I have at 5 and 6, but that's who I would, put in it for. So I think I would switch my top 4 around to Georgia, Michigan, Texas, and Florida State.
Well, currently the top 4 in the country is my top 4.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm not going to make any changes to my top 4. I do believe Ohio State. I don't think they run the table, but I don't think they lose to Penn State. I think Ohio State's getting there with their offense. And Michigan is on a different level than even Ohio State, but I'm still keeping Ohio State in there at this point. It is tough, though, when you're looking at Florida State. Yes, they beat LSU. They've beaten Clemson, but then they also struggled against Boston College. Oregon, that was a very dominant performance they put up on a very hyped up team in Colorado. Because what's scary about Oregon is that offense is going to put up a ton of points, but that defense, that's something that you don't see much of in the Pac-12, is a solid defense. And that Oregon defense is good. So those, I guess I'll go ahead and say my 5 and 6 would be Florida State at 5 and Oregon at 6.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, that Oregon-Washington game is going to be.
Yeah, that's also a reason that's what I was getting ready to get into at my 5 and 6, because I have USC at 5 and Penn State at 6. I think Penn State beats Ohio State this year. So I think that'll be interesting. I still don't know that I'm necessarily in on Ohio State. Obviously, the win against Notre Dame is pretty big. Well, it's big, not pretty big. It is big. But I still don't know. I think Michigan is still, above where they are, and Penn State has looked better. So I think those are 2 games that Ohio State can lose and knock themselves out. And it's always tricky, even if you think that Ohio State's going to make it to, the game against Michigan undefeated, you still got to think like, okay, they're not going to play in their conference championship game, which I know the college football playoff doesn't care about conferences, but like it's still a loss late in the season. Yeah. And how far does that drop them depending on how badly they lose? I'm not saying they're going to lose by 20, but I'm just saying, if they lost by a lot last year. Right. But they needed USC to fumble the bag. They needed things to happen. So once you get into a situation where you're hoping other teams lose, that's not a great spot for you to be in. So I do think Penn State gets them, because I guess it is going to be at the Shoe, which is going to be a little tougher for Penn State. If it were in,
is it?
I think, is it not?
I thought it was at Penn State,
because it was at Penn State last year. That's why I assumed. Okay. That's why I assumed maybe it's not. I'm sure in the comments people will let us know. But I thought, without having looked at their schedule, I thought that Penn State was. Just going off of the fact that Penn State hosted Ohio State last year. Yeah. I know it's possible for them to, obviously have that, because Oh, we don't need to get into that. I was going to say, well, wait, was Wisconsin at home against Purdue last year when they played?
Yeah, they were in Madison last year.
Okay, because I mean, sometimes, cause I know like in the NFL, you could have. I know for the longest time the Colts always played at New England. Like it hardly ever flip flopped back to Indianapolis. It seemed like. I
It
feel
always
like
seems like the Colts are playing the Raiders in Indianapolis now.
right. So I know that doesn't always flip flop. So wherever the site is, I know it's going to be tough. I do think Penn State wins that one. So I think, and I don't think it's entirely out of the question to see Penn State as the second team in the college football playoff for the Big Ten, and not just rather than it being either Ohio State, Michigan, or both of those two teams. I think Penn State could possibly work their way in. But no, you brought up Oregon and Washington. I'm going to that game on October 14th. I'll be in Seattle. I don't want to jinx anything. I'm not saying, oh, Washington is going to be my fifth team or Oregon's going to be my fifth team, because I know the second I start talking big about them, I've got one more weekend of games. They play, Oregon plays Stanford this week and then has a bye. Washington, I can't remember who they played. Then they have a bye. And then it's the game that I'm going to on the 14th. So I'm really working hard to not jinx them. I've been telling people, I'm like, I need to, when I make my bet this weekend, I need to make a bet for Oregon to lose to Stanford and Washington to lose. So at least if they do lose, I can make some money off of it. But yeah, I'm like, I'm not touching. I mean, I know I should put Oregon higher than USC possibly. I know I should put Washington higher than USC. They both played better, or at least had more impressive wins so far than USC has. But I'm like, the second that I start tooting their horn, that means they're gonna lose, and I don't want either of them to lose before that game on the 14th. I want them both to be undefeated and as highly ranked as possible.
I think you're gonna be okay with at least Oregon. Stanford is.
But no, I mean, I think it's in Palo Alto though, which I mean,
I don't think that really matters. I mean, Stanford lost to an FCS school in Palo Alto,
right? But I just feel like Oregon for one is notorious for losing games that they shouldn't. They
on the road, especially.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. It feels like even when they've gone in to Stanford and they're supposed to beat them, there's something weird that goes wrong. That's a couple of years ago. They were supposed to possibly be in the college football playoff conversation, and they lost to Stanford in Palo Alto. So I'm not ruling anything out with the Pac-12 especially. I know they've had a fantastic start to their season, but I'm not ruling anything out for that conference because they like to, get my hopes up. I really like Pac-12 football. I'm sad that it's leaving, and so
it's just moving to the Midwest. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, right, but it's not the Pac-12. It's going to be the Big Ten, and we talked about it last week. The biggest.
It's going to be the Big Ten West Coast. I mean, technically, you're still going to see Oregon and Washington.
Right. I know they're not.
USC.
Their programs aren't folding, but it's not going to be the Pac-12.
No, that's what they're not going. I don't think they're even going to change up their style because they're in the Big Ten.
I don't know. That's still my favorite meme from last year when they were like, they had that meme of the guy that they're the person that's like hunched over and squinting, and they're like in the captions like, is that 3 fullbacks? And the captions like, when USC plays Iowa for the first time, like, is that is that a fullback? What is that? What's that? So
it should probably change because let's just be honest, Brian Ferentz is not going to be at Iowa after this season, and you might actually see a more modern style of play coming from the Hawkeyes.
What would be weirder? Okay, this is a conversation to have about the Big Ten and the Pac-12. What would be weirder? An Iowa offense that post Brian Ferentz scores like 50 points a game and you see them slinging it all over the field like in Oregon, or you see like a USC or an Oregon just going ground and pound and not putting and really just becoming like the Wisconsin that has like these big linemen and just are running over people.
I think it would be the Iowa thing because It wasn't that long ago that we were seeing that out of Oregon and USC. Oregon had LaMichael James, who wasn't a ground and pound, but he had LeGarrette Blount, who was a ground and pound. USC had Reggie Bush and Lendale White at the same time. I mean, they weren't tossing it all over the field as much as they are now.
Right.
So I think it would be weirder to see Iowa actually scoring points and not, getting into a battle of the kickers. Yeah. I'll tell you what though, the Big Ten is coming around more towards a style, offensive style at least, of the Pac-12. You see Ohio State slings it all over the field. They still ground and pound it because they can, but they sling it all over the field. Michigan is, running a lot, but they have the ability to sling it around the field, and the quarterback's running, and it's just all over the place. Wisconsin is switching to more of an air raid style offense and going away from their original ground and pound. Purdue is known for being a spread them out, pass the ball as much as you can team, dating all the way back to Joe Tiller. So I think you're starting to see, which is kind of funny because Pac-12 teams, Purdue hasn't fared well against the Pac-12, but Pac-12 teams have not completely dominated Purdue. Or, I think the only team that the Pac-12, Purdue almost went into Oregon and were one dropped 2-point conversion at the very end of the game away from upsetting Oregon in Autzen. The year before, Purdue should have beaten Oregon. They had Oregon on the ropes, and the first play from scrimmage was Corey Sheets running an 84-yard touchdown from right the get-go. So I think the Big Ten is more coming into the style of play offensively that we're seeing from the Pac-12, where the Pac-12 teams are going to run into issues are the Big Ten defenses. The Big Ten defenses are very physical.
I'll keep it a buck with you. I was looking to see, because when we were talking about Hudson Card and Taven Jackson, I was like, okay, well, because I wasn't entirely sure what the Big Ten's plan was, going into like next year and beyond. I was like, so are we going to see, is Purdue going to move to the Big Ten East, and then we're going to see like the Big Ten West basically be Nebraska, Minnesota, the 4 Pac-12 teams and stuff like that, or Nebraska, Iowa, all of them. And they're not doing divisions from what I saw. So that when I saw the article that like said that and showed like the upcoming opponents, I was like, all right, I'm kind of getting a little excited for some of these matchups of like
I'm keeping
USC and Purdue.
I'm keeping my Purdue season tickets through next year because USC is coming to Ross-Ade, and I really, really want to see that. I know, there is a chance it could be Caleb Williams still at quarterback based on the comments his dad made. But I don't think it will be.
No.
Unless he wants to go play for the Chicago Bears. But it's gonna be fun. Then I think in 25, Purdue goes to UCLA, but I wouldn't be surprised if all of those schedules that they came out with last year get totally scrapped.
Well, they will be because
they've
of Oregon and Washington. Yeah, because that was that when I looked at that article, because I was like, does Purdue or IU play Oregon? Or because that's a Purdue game I want to go to, is them playing Oregon. This was was a fun one. I made my plans to go to Washington, Oregon before I knew I could literally wait a few years and see Oregon play at Ross-Ade.
Hey, it wasn't that. I'm going to say it wasn't that long ago.
It was when we were in college. Yeah,
it was my junior year at Purdue, which was like, I think it was 2000, the fall of 2008.
B. Scott, if you're referencing a time that you went to Purdue, it's a long time ago.
Gosh, yeah, it's been almost. Yeah, it's 25 years ago that Purdue and Oregon played at Ross-Ade. I'm dating myself when I said Corey Sheets, and literally the game before that, or 2 games before that, I believe it was when LeGarrette Blount cold-cocked a defensive player from Boise State.
Right. So I was like, I vividly remember that being my freshman year of college because I was in my dorm at La Follette, R.I.P., rest in peace, La Follette. And I like remember like just kind of watching that game because it was Thursday night, opening night, whatever, of college football. And because I think Ball State played that night as well. That's when they lost to North Texas. I was in the band. And
North Texas was the next year because I was at Ball State when they lost to North Texas.
No, North Texas was my freshman year because that was the year that because I was in the band for that, because everybody was talking. Because I remember the band when we were losing to North Texas. I remember the band being like, so some of my fellow freshmen were like, "Oh, I thought this team went undefeated the year before. Why aren't they good?"
They
and
did.
I was like, no. They were complaining that Ball State wasn't good. I was like, no. Last year was the anomaly. This is the Ball State team I've watched my entire life. Last year was the
Ball State went undefeated my junior year at Purdue.
Yeah, that was 2008 was the undefeated season. So 2009, my freshman year, was when they, had Kelly Page and were losing to North Texas.
Yes, and that was my first year at Ball State.
Right. So,
but that was not the year that the LeGarrette Blount thing happened. It happened.
I guarantee you it was 2009.
I know why I think it was in 08, because I remember we were riding the shuttle from our tailgate lot on the other side of the campus talking about it. Because LeGarrette Blount played in that game at Purdue, and we were all like, he really shouldn't be playing. Some people, the old people, were like, he shouldn't be playing. He should have been kicked off the team.
Here, I'm looking it up because we gotta know.
Because I'm pretty certain it was 08.
Okay, I was like, I gotta wait for Google to spell LeGarrette Blount for me because I don't know how to spell his name. LeGarrette Blount punch. September 4th, 2009.
Okay.
Against
I'm
Boise
getting
State.
maybe I was on.
No, you're good. I just remember
it was 25 years ago, Craig.
Right.
25 years ago.
It was like basically a different. It was a different time. It was a completely different time. It might as well be.
Joe Tiller was still head coach at Purdue.
Yeah, that's wild.
Curtis Painter was the quarterback.
Well,
seriously, he was.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Well, on that note, I think that's where we can wrap it up for this week's edition of the Crash Course Podcast. Thank you guys all for hanging out. Remember, you can like us on Facebook, 3C Media. Go follow us on Twitter at 3C Media Sports. Go follow the YouTube channel. If you're listening to us on the podcast apps, go to the YouTube channel, hit subscribe, ring the bell. You guys have been showing a lot of love to those videos. Also, go over to the TikTok channel, 3C Media over there. We've got some good content. Just released our Week 6 Player of the Week for Indiana High School football. Shout out Thomas Gutskowski and his 6 touchdown performance for Ben Davis. That was really cool. And then remember, you can listen to us every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course Podcast. You can find me at Crash Course FM on Twitter. B. Scott, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brandon_Scott87.
Next week, we'll be talking hoops. It's time to get into some Pacers conversation. We'll be talking about the Indiana Pacers and previewing their season as the preseason is about to get underway for the NBA. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But until then, have a good week, everybody.